This is an Irreverent podcast. Check out irreverent.fm for shows from all our friends. Hello and welcome to Exvangelical, a show exploring the world inside and outside the evangelical subculture. I'm your host, Blake Chastain. My guests this week are Stephen Jones and Seth Harshman, the co-hosts of the E9 podcast. Longtime listeners of the show will know Stephen from his prior appearances on the show way back in episode 2, as well as a 3-part series at the end of 2016 discussing the mystical traditions in Christianity. In this first part of our 2-part conversation, Stephen and Seth walk me through the Enneagram. Listeners to this show likely have at least a passing familiarity with the Enneagram if you're not already a full-blown Enneagram nerd. The Enneagram is a tool for self-understanding and has been instrumental for a number of exvangelicals who have undergone deconstruction. Seth and Stephen talk about the 9 different personality types found in the Enneagram and the things that motivate them. I know both Stephen and Seth from college, and it was great to reconnect with them and discuss this with them. In the second part of my conversation with them, which will be published later, Seth and Stephen type me and help to give me some initial footing to explore my type. You can find their podcast, the E9 Podcast, wherever you subscribe to shows. Now, with the publication of this show, I'm going to try something a little different. I have a second feed for the show. It's called EXV Extras, and this feed is hosted by Anchor, which is this podcast app for Android and iOS. Now, that app allows for call-ins, just like on radio shows, and I'd love to get your feedback on this episode with a feature I'm calling Call and Response. I know it's church nerdy, sorry, deal. I'll publish basically what'll happen is I'll publish a short mini-sode in that feed asking a question. And this week that question is, what is your Enneagram type and how has knowing it helped you with your personal development? Again, the question is, what is your Enneagram type and how has knowing it helped your personal development? So here's what you do. You download the Anchor app and sign up. Search for EXV Extras and follow the show. Then tap the call-in feature. There's a button when you go to my show page in the app, and you tap that call-in button and leave a message. I believe it caps out at around 1 minute, so keep it succinct. What I'll do is I'll publish your responses in a follow-up episode in that EXV Extras feed. This is just a little experiment, and I just am curious to see how it goes. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at brchastain. You can follow the show on Twitter at exvangelicalpod. You can like the show on Facebook at facebook.com/exvangelicalpod. Of course, you can request to join the Exvangelical Facebook group, which has over 3,000 members of folks talking through different aspects of being exvangelical. And if you could please go over to iTunes or your Apple Podcast app and rate or review the show, I would greatly appreciate that. It helps people find the show. And if you want to support the show, you can also do so via Patreon at patreon.com/exvangelical. All right, everyone, let's get into it. Everybody, welcome back to Exvangelical. I have 2 guests with me this week. I have Stephen Jones, who's been on the show a few times. He is also known as the Skeptical Mystic, as well as Seth Harshman. I know both of them from my college days. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thanks. Howdy.
So let's start with you, Seth. I'd like to hear just a little bit about how you, what we're here to talk about today actually is the Enneagram, which is very well known in certain parts of the internet for being this sort of personality typing system. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So I'd love to hear sort of how you discovered the Enneagram and your approach to it, and then Stephen, from you as well.
Yeah, so the way I discovered the Enneagram is early in college. I went home probably as a freshman or sophomore, all excited about some knowledge I'd been hearing about, like MBTI, because every freshman and sophomore gets super excited about Myers-Briggs. At some point, I would go home, and it was just like this thing that, I fell in love with like everyone else does. And there was a pastor that was a really good friend with my parents, and he said, MBTI is kind of interesting, but you should check out this thing called the Enneagram. And he even like brought some books over by my parents' house like a day or two later, and they sat on my parents' shelves for years because it just sounded so weird to me. Like the way he explained, he's like, it's actually organized around our core sins, and which is language I don't use anymore. But I just thought, oh, this doesn't sound great at all. It sounds kind of wishy-washy and hippie, and I don't get it. I wasn't ready for it. And at that age, most people I would say, aren't ready for it. But I never forgot the name, and I never forgot the symbol, even though I wasn't really interested in it. And so come back around to early to mid 30s, and I'm actually an adjunct professor at the same university that I had been a student at, the one you talk about all the time. And a student from another university nearby in the same county comes up to me and said he was dating a student that I knew, and he was like, Professor Harshman, you should check this thing out. It's kind of interesting. I'm real into it. And so I started looking into it, and I was more interested. I was more ready for it. But it wasn't until sometime after that, my friend Steve Jones here, who had really gotten into it, started talking about it. And I was like, well, if Steve's into it, there must really be something to it. And since then, which has been a few years, I really dove in hard and got to understand it, and really wanted to. I wasn't just passionate about like my type, but just about the system as a whole, and trying to understand it and how to apply it and use it in a way that's beneficial to those around me. So that's how I.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting that it was sort of that circuitous path, but I think that's common for a lot of people. Like I've sort of been exposed to it through Steve and some other people on and off over the last couple of years, and it just is something that sort of keeps nagging at me, I guess.
I still like to use terms like providential, like even just that very first introduction to it where I wasn't at all interested. I never forgot the word Enneagram. I remember every once in a while seeing those books still sitting on my parents' shelf and going, oh yeah, I remember that thing that I wasn't interested in. Most of the time, if I'm not interested in something, it's gone.
Right. Yeah.
But that just kind of stuck around somehow.
Yeah. Interesting. So Steve, how about you?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Seth's story, and it seems like so many others, hinge on the idea of some kind of trustworthy authority of some kind, right? Like not necessarily an authority figure, but someone who you trust. And that's certainly how it worked for me, because the Enneagram on its own seems like a really strange thing. It's esoteric and kind of arcane in ways. And I'm really skeptical about things. That's why the word is in my online moniker, right? I resist a lot of these things, and I resisted the Enneagram for years. However, I was studying spiritual direction under some wonderful nuns, and eventually one of them really started to expose me to the Enneagram as a useful tool, and I still resisted for a long time, even while I was trying to understand it. For me, and it seems like sometimes for many others, the Enneagram doesn't really click as a model, as a language, until you see yourself in it. When you recognize yourself reflected back at you in ways that are revealing and potentially very uncomfortable, then the system as a whole begins to take on meaning and make sense, right? And that's what it took for me, was finally recognizing parts of myself being revealed to me in ways that made me feel both known and horrified. And that's what convinced me that there was a powerful potential as a tool, right? And though we tend to lump the Enneagram in with other personality typologies, I'm not sure that it qualifies as one. It's sort of the anti-personality typology in a way, because its basic premise is that you are not truly as you have come to know yourself. It's about exposing the way you've limited yourself, and you call that a personality, but suggesting ways that you might be free from those artificial limitations, you know?
Yeah, one of the common phrases that's used, and I remember when Steve was really getting excited about it, this stuck with me, and this idea stuck with me, but the phrase is, you are not your personality. And that, even if we've not thought about it, that's what we tend to assume is, my personality, that's who I am. That's how we use that word. But the Enneagram challenges that directly, says you are not your personality, and so it exposes to you what your personality is so that you can then move beyond it. So even the 9 personalities are only exposed for the sake of then moving beyond them and finding your true self.
Yeah, that is a very compelling and interesting idea to try to supersede those things that limit you and that you feel like are not that you're not able to sort of break out of, I guess. Like these are just the sort of thorn in your flesh sort of thing. Like this is the thing you're stuck with. And yeah. So yeah, let's get into a bit about it then, and sort of talk about those 9 personality types and why they help people understand themselves better. The Enneagram, that it refers to like a 9-sided figure, and that's where the name comes from. But even though lots of people, and I'm sure lots of listeners know about the Enneagram, I'd love to be able to give some context here to those different personality types and maybe some other info, and if we're led that direction by the conversation.
Sure.
The symbol, one of the most recognizable elements of the Enneagram, is where it takes its name. Enneagram means drawing of 9, right? And so there's this interesting little drawing where the numbers are interconnected in this complex way.
If you Google Enneagram, it'll pop up.
Yep.
So if you're not familiar with it, do so now.
Yeah. And all of those connections end up being very meaningful eventually. But at first, it's helpful to just back away from that image and notice that there are 9 points around a circle, and that they're arranged in groups of 3. So at the very top, you have a group of 8, 9, and 1. On the left side, you have a group of 5, 6, and 7. And on the right side, you have a group of 2, 3, 4. And that's because they represent, like in classic anthropology, the 3 parts of the self, right? The head on the left side, the heart on the right side, and in the center, the will or the gut, right? So the idea is that when we're young at some point, whether it's a moment or whether it's a process, we begin to be exposed to a world that is risky or dangerous or fill in the blank.
It's just too big for us.
Yeah, overwhelming in some way.
Yeah.
And we react to that generally by losing touch with part of ourselves, by kind of fortressing ourselves up in one particular aspect of ourselves. And so we tend to become compulsive about that, right? So for instance, I identify as a type 5, I guess. But I very clearly am. Once we start talking about those patterns, it's like someone is taking snapshots of my private life. But what that means is, yes, I do head things well, but I'm also compulsive about them. And I tend to be very out of touch with my heart. Because all of these numbers are on a circle, yes, but you'll notice that there's a very significant gap between the 4 and the 5. And that's because a circle is one way to look at it, but a horseshoe is another. So they're really on a spectrum from 5 being on one extreme end and 4 being on the other extreme end. So 5 is the headiest of the head types, and 4 is the heartiest of the heart types, in a way, right? And so that would be a useful way to go about talking about these 9 types, is we'll probably start with 5s because we're both 5s. And that way we can talk about the head center, those 3 types, and then we'll talk about the will or the gut center, those 3 types, and then we'll finish with the heart center and those 3 types.
And I think it's also useful for everyone to hear us talk about our types first, because I'm also a type 5. And sometimes when you talk about them, you can kind of sound a bit like a jerk, because you're calling out all the stuff that people don't want to recognize about themselves.
It's hard to not sound judgmental.
It's very hard to not sound judgmental, and it's actually kind of useful to talk about them in a way where those things are maybe a little bit inflated, because when you're first hearing about the Enneagram, you tend to recognize the crummy stuff about you, the bad stuff. That's what's most easy to type with.
And that's one of the most revealing things about how the Enneagram works. It's basic assumption that you are not your personality. Each of the types is most recognizable in you the less healthy you are.
Interesting.
The more healthy you become, the more balance you have, and it's harder to identify those dysfunctional patterns in yourself. So identifying patterns early on means exaggerating the negative, and that's just kind of how it has to work.
And when you're being typed, when you're going through the 9 types and trying to figure out what you are, most people's experience with that is that one hurt the most.
Yes.
That's the one I am. That's what happens. Whichever one just stings the most.
If you really hope you're not one of those types, that might be you.
It's the one that you're going, I wish. Can we just skip to the next one, please? That's probably whatever one you are.
So we like to start with 5 because since exploring the negative aspects of those types can come off sounding so negative or judgmental, it's helpful to start by exposing the rougher parts of ourselves, first, as a gesture of goodwill, perhaps.
Yeah.
Do you want to start with the 5, Seth?
Yeah, let's start with the 5. So 5s, like Steve said, they are the headiest of the head types. We are a type that we are just super stuck in our head. We actually have a term that we use for that called castling up, where that is where we feel safest, is inside our own head. And if we can have the right way of thinking about something, the right way of ordering things in our mind, that's what makes us feel safe. And that's I pull that out first because that's important for all the head types. 5, 6, and 7 all have issues around fear and a sense of security. That's what we're trying to achieve in 3 different ways. We're all trying to feel safe. And so for 5s, we do that by trying to have a way of thinking about the world and being prepared with the right knowledge, particularly. If we want to always be prepared for what's going to come at us.
Sometimes it's usually knowledge. Sometimes it's about being organized and prepared, because even knowledge is a way of trying to bring order to a world that seems so disorganized. So there's so much drama and so much intensity, and it's risky not being able to make sense out of all that. So even the accumulation of knowledge is a way to try to bring a sense of order to the world so that we know how to act within it. However, the dysfunctional end of that means that unless we're particularly healthy and coping well with it,
which I am not,
it tends to be a withdrawal from the world, and we will become locked in a pattern of perpetual need to prepare, and so we tend to not move into right action.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
We will prepare forever and never actually do anything.
Yeah.
We love the way things are in theory, and then we're hesitant to put them out into the world because that's when cracks start to form. We'd rather just have the perfect mental image of how things should be, and which means that really we only ever watch life from the sidelines. We never participate. That's the danger that we fall into.
Right. Yeah.
And then the other danger, the other dysfunction is that we're so heady and so just so stuck in our heads that we're very out of touch with our heart. And so fives will talk about how, like, if you ask a five how they feel, it's kind of like I'll check inside. I'll look inside my heart and go, I'm not sure what's there right now. It's just kind of a blank spot for now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even if something major is currently going on, I'm saying, I don't know how I feel about this yet. My emotions are going to come later.
Usually once we're alone.
Yeah, usually once we're alone, when it's safe.
Yeah.
There's something in the five dysfunction where emotions aren't safe yet. It's not until I go back into my castle that I allow myself to feel those, and even then we process them at like a trickle's pace.
Yeah.
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 So the call for a five is to somehow, there are various tools within the Enneagram that can help with this, but the goal for a five is then to let go of the obsessive need to prepare and to move into right action. Find a way to engage the world without having everything figured out ahead of time. And so I like to use the model of improvisational acting for that, right? Learn how to improvise rather than rely on scripts all the time. Expose yourself to the world, which is a sign of health for fives.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, part of the reason, and I don't think we've mentioned it, but Steve and I are starting a podcast about the Enneagram. Part of the reason we're doing that is to try and act counter to like just the tendency that we have to just sit back and read books about the Enneagram and talk about it amongst ourselves. Right. No, we actually want to act. We want to do something. We want to put something out there.
Yeah.
You know, we have people walking in my house right now, so we're gonna.
It's
probably a good chance for us to switch to 6 when we.
We'll come back and switch to 6
here.
All right. So we were about to transition to 6s. So
yes.
Yeah.
So 6s are still in the head center. They still have an obsessive mental energy happening. It just manifests in a different way than 5s do.
Yeah, 6s really embody the core issue of the head center, which is fear and security, in fact. So 6s are just the most fearful of all types. The way 6s work is they basically just scan their environment for whatever hazards may be there constantly. They call this hypervigilance. And so, like, my favorite example of this, it's not always like life-threatening hazards. So my favorite example is I was at a party with my wife one day. It was a kid's birthday party taking place in church fellowship hall. She and a friend and I were having a conversation, and I had no clue where my son was. He was like 3 at the time. But of course, she knew. Like, she was very aware of where he was at all the time. And at one point, he goes over to the cake table, and someone hands him a paper plate full of cake. And he has no supervision of there. He's all the way across the fellowship hall from us. And as soon as he puts his hands on that plate, my wife says, "Ooh, I'll be right back. All I can see is cake all over the floor." No, she doesn't say, "I'm afraid he'll drop it." She actually says, "All I can see." And that's what the way it is for 6s, like, all the time. They scan their environment, find all the hazards, and then inflate them.
It's almost as if they see the world in terms of what can always go wrong. Like that's the lens they see everything through.
And as if it is going to go wrong, especially the more unhealthy they are, the more inflated all of those hazards become. It's as if all the wrong stuff is going to happen all the time.
Which makes them great troubleshooters for your project, whatever your project is.
Yeah.
It's good to have one on a team.
We talk about the dysfunctions. So far we've talked about two of them. It's worth noting that all of these dysfunctions are also strengths. This is another term that is used by different teachers of the Enneagram. Is your strength is your weakness. And so for a 6, this scanning their environment and finding all the hazards is a weakness because it really inhibits their ability to just kind of live their life and go about doing what they want to do unafraid. At the same time, they've developed an incredible skill. The difference between strength and weakness is actually, are they stuck in a compulsion or are they exercising it out of freedom? And for all of the Enneagram types, that is what you want to move toward, is out of exercising all of these things as a compulsion when you are stuck in them, and learn how to exercise it freely. And that typically takes a long time and is a huge journey. More about the 6. What about the 6, Steve? What else about the 6?
So, the 6 and the 3 and the 9 have a special relationship with each other. And when the 6 is in strength, they move to 9, right? Isn't it?
Yep.
And so it's about finding a sense of peace, right? It's about trying to construct space wherein you can be peaceful, so that you can live outside of your obsession with the fear.
Yeah.
Now, one thing that's important to know about the 6, all of these, we don't need at all to get into the issue of subtypes and instinctual stacking and all that stuff. If you want to know more about that stuff, we've got a podcast where we'll be addressing a lot of that more in depth, and it's fascinating. However, it's worth noting for the 6, all the 9 types have what we call a counter type, where you're still participating in the same obsession, but it moves in the opposite direction.
It shows up drastically differently.
Yeah, we notice this most dramatically in the 6, and this is why sometimes the 6 can be a little tricky to identify, because the counter type 6 looks more like a thrill seeker, right? They're engaging in all kinds of risky behaviors all the time, and they're not even aware that those behaviors are being driven by the same fear that in other people manifests as paralyzation.
Yeah, so what this looks like is when they scan their environment, they see all of the hazards, but instead of running away, they run towards it. So it's basically the difference between flight or fight.
Exactly.
And they fight instead of flight. And so it almost shows up as like someone who is constantly trying to prove that they're not afraid. And
but
they may not
they're
even
not aware of that.
Yeah, they may not even be aware of that need to prove that they're not afraid. And so when they see a hazard, they're ready to just jump right into it, which can be really bad. That's not necessarily healthy behavior.
Right, yeah.
Those are what we call, that's the counter phobic 6, where a typical 6 would be a phobic 6. Now, 6s are fantastic. Let me say this. We estimate that Enneagram people, whatever that is. We estimate that 6s are probably 50% of the population. And so they are the overwhelming majority over any other type. And this is good because they are the glue that holds everything together. Boy, they keep us all safe in ways that we don't even recognize on a day-to-day basis. I think it would be a fun game for our podcast sometime to actually just go around the circle and imagine if any other type was 50% of the population and just speculate about what kind of dystopia that would be. no other type works if they are 50% of the population. We'd all be dead. So we should all thank God for the sixes that surround us every day. They are angels unbeknownst to us. They're just wonderful.
Yeah. I mean, the sixes in a very obvious way because there are so many of them, but we really do benefit from our own and each other's dysfunction in fascinating ways. And so, I mean, that's part of the task of the Enneagram. I've emphasized we both have, how we're not our personalities and we need to be free of those. But also, you don't start coming from the place you come from. You know, you don't lose your rootedness in a particular type, right? And so I'm still a 5, no matter how healthy I am. And also that is good. I don't need to obsess with unbecoming myself, just merely not being limited by the boundaries that I keep around myself, right? So I still do castle time. I still participate in a lot of those behaviors that used to be more dysfunctional and now just have more balance, right? And so, hooray for sixes, even in their dysfunction.
Yes.
Because there is benefit from all these things.
True.
We should move on to the 7.
Move on to the 7.
Which is 7 is still in the head type, but the least headiest of the head types.
At least they appear that way.
They appear that way. Because 7s, rather than, the way a 5 will castle up in the mind, right? 7s actually will try to avoid the cyclical patterns of thought that 5s kind of get lost in, and they do that by seeking happiness, which is not necessarily just straight pleasure, but can be. 7s, I like to say, we always like to say this this phrase about money not being able to buy happiness, but a 7 knows that's bullshit. Give them $10 and they'll throw a party for you and your friends and have a good time. 7s know how to generate fun. They know how to find it for themselves. And this is obviously brilliant for a lot of reasons, but the dysfunction in it is that they're trying to avoid dealing with the darkness, the hard feelings, negative thoughts. They're avoiding those things rather than dealing with them, and eventually that will catch up with them if they don't find a way to have balance.
Yeah, so, I mean, where a 5 naturally, compulsively moves in, that's the very space that the 7 is terrified of. They never want to get stuck inside themselves because they feel like if I take a moment, if I stop, if it's quiet, then I'm going to feel the sadness and I might never get out. So that's the burden that 7s bear all the time, is that if they allow any amount of sadness, it might just take over. They might never get out of it. And this is something that I encourage anyone who is working with the Enneagram at all, is not just find out their type, but take some time to step into the shoes of the other types to help understand them. If you're only learning your type in the Enneagram, you're missing out on the richness that it has to offer to help you understand and empathize with the other types. And so, like I said, 7s seem like so much fun. I know several 7s. I have 7s in my life. I love them. They're great to be around. But I also have to remind myself that there is a burden that they're carrying that comes along with all this happiness. I've actually had a 7 basically quote that exact same thing to me as I was talking with her. She said, "If I ever get sad, what if I never get out of it?" And then she went on to say, like, what if I let someone else around me be sad? So not only was she bearing the burden of her own happiness all the time, she felt like she wasn't allowed to let anyone around her be happy. So everyone in the room, their happiness is on her all the time. So it's really this. I mean, just imagine feeling that way. This incredible burden.
Now, one of the other interesting things about a 7 kind of has a superpower.
Yeah.
Sometimes we call, some people have called this monkey brain, where 7s will just constantly go from one idea to the next. They make great interior decorators. They have all these interesting things they tend to be good at.
Yeah.
Except the link in them is that they're great for generating ideas.
Yes.
If you want a good brainstorm, you want to include sevens in that project, right? Sevens aren't so great for follow through. That's what you have sixes for, right? But sixes aren't quite as good for brainstorming because they'll be more likely to shoot ideas down because they see what could go wrong. But sevens aren't thinking about that end of things. They're not thinking about what could go wrong. They're thinking about the possibilities.
Yeah. Sevens are obsessed with possibility. They have trouble committing to any one thing because, and actually, a guest on our podcast came up with this phrase that we love. Sevens want to choose everything instead of any one thing.
Mm-hmm.
They don't like to limit their possibilities down. They don't like commitment because commitment feels like being stuck, and being stuck is where sadness happens.
What if the thing I commit to when I get there is not what will make me happy?
Yeah.
And I need to get out of it so I can do the thing that will make me happy.
I've heard of a famous seven on another podcast talk about this, but one of the sevens that I know had this very same experience where after they got married, they actually had to mourn the possibilities that had died along with them getting married. So basically, every other woman, they had to, on their honeymoon, mourn this that they would never have any other possibility, that they are now stuck with just one woman for the rest of their lives. And it's very healthy for a seven to do that. They should do that instead of, thinking that the possibilities are still out there.
Right, or building resentment towards their partner.
And so I have a friend who, on his honeymoon, basically huddled himself down in the corner of a closet in his hotel room and just sat there and cried, weeped. And his wife is like knocking on the door, like, "Are you okay?" And he's like, I'm fine. I just need to do this." And it's good that he did, like I said. But that's kind of like the mentality of the seven. Like, they want everything.
Mm-hmm.
Not just any one thing. They don't want to settle on anything.
Yeah. So it goes for the head center.
So it goes for the head center.
Obvious parallels in all of those. They all have a kind of fear. There's something that they're trying hard to avoid. It just manifests in these
very different ways.
Very different ways, yeah. But that moves us into the gut center, because after seven is the eight.
Yeah, the eight.
And eights are willful things.
Yeah.
And they very clearly shoot from the hip. They're gut people to the core.
Yeah. So eights just have a sense of presence unlike anyone else on the Enneagram. I mean, when an eight walks into the room, you just kind of feel gravity shift a little bit. Like, they just carry themselves in such a way where whenever I'm around an eight, I'm always just a little afraid. I have an eight that I've been doing some work with lately, and every time I talk with her on the phone after I hang up, I always have to check myself. I'm like, why am I breathing so heavily right now? Why is my heart rate up? Like, all I was doing was having conversation, and I'm having a physiological response to just being on the phone with this person. A lot of people find eights to be really mysterious, and a lot of Enneagram experts say that it took them the longest to really understand eights. If you want to understand at least male eights, I'd recommend watching the movie Patton.
Mm-hmm.
That's when the idea of eightness kind of congealed for me, and especially there's a particular scene, two particular scenes in the movie Patton that help me understand eights. One is when Patton drives up in his Jeep onto a particular battlefield, and the battle is over. There's carnage everywhere. Like there's tanks flipped over. There's dead bodies. There are wounded that people are tending to, but there's still smoke from the battle, and it's just carnage and destruction. And he walks up, finds a small hill that he's standing on. He's surveying this battlefield. He takes a puff of his cigar and says, God, I love this. 8s just want to suck the marrow out of life. They just have this way of drawing in like just the visceral energy of life, and it just fills them up.
And they don't shy away from the conflict of it.
Yeah, no. In fact, 8s oftentimes will encourage conflict. If you have a family member who at Thanksgiving loves to just like bring up a controversial topic at the dinner room table and then just sit back and watch people argue, that's an 8 who's sucking the marrow out of all of you. He needs that conflict, that energy in the room to fill himself up or herself up.
Right.
We like to use this image of when an 8 meets someone new. Or not necessarily even when they meet somebody new,
no.
But when they meet somebody new, they'll be antagonistic toward that person to see how they respond. Because, interestingly enough, 8s are aware that they are powerful people. And if they're not in a situation where the people around them can handle that power, then they're not safe.
Yeah.
Right? They're not free to be themselves.
So,
they need to know that you can offer resistance. So an 8, not necessarily in a negative sense at all, will absolutely get in your face and say, fuck you. And
that's
the proper response,
that's their favorite term.
If you want to make an 8 feel safe, you say fuck you right back. And then they'll respect you, and then they feel safe.
Right.
They know you can handle their conflict.
This is actually the second scene from Patton that I was going to bring up.
Oh, yeah.
Because so 8s they're afraid of vulnerability. In fact, they don't even like to recognize their own vulnerability at all. And so they put on just this very strong front. And that's basically what we've been describing. Mm-hmm. And so how do you go about making a relationship, becoming friends with people, if you can't be vulnerable? You do it through conflict. And so there's another scene in Patton when both the Americans and the Russians have reached Berlin, and they're all celebrating together. And a Russian general comes up and through his interpreter says, General Patton, General whatever Akov, I can't remember his name, would like to have a celebratory drink with you. And Patton says, he says it to the interpreter, but stares straight into the other general's eyes and says, you tell that son of a bitch I'll never drink with a Russian. And the interpreter says, I can't tell him that. He says, you tell him exactly that. So the interpreter turns to him, says something in Russian. The general looks shocked, turns back to the interpreter, says something in Russian. And the interpreter says, General Patton, he thinks you're a son of a bitch too. And he says, oh, well, let's have a drink then. He just needed to be called a son of a bitch back and everything was fine, just to see if this guy was really worth it. Mm-hmm. That's the way 8s operate. They push you to see if you'll push back because they need to know that you're sturdy, if they can trust you.
Yeah. That makes me think of...
So they thrive on conflict. They need it. They don't know how to interact outside of that conflict, typically.
Yeah.
Let me offer another complementary but maybe contrasting image of an 8.
I'd love to hear it.
Here's an image of an 8. First of all, this is a healthier 8.
Yeah.
This is someone...
Patton was not necessarily a healthy 8.
Exactly. So one of the people I studied with was an older woman. And here she's short and pleasant. Everyone loves her. But she identifies as an 8, and for good reason, because she also describes herself as a rhinoceros. And she is intense. She's brilliant, but obviously operates from her gut. She trusts her intuitions. And yeah, maybe she stops to consider them before she acts on them, but she trusts them. And she is not afraid of calling people out, and she would call me out regularly.
This is Steve's a pretty big build. And this is a tiny little nun that would walk straight up to him and get in his face.
Yeah. One time
just poke him in the chest.
Yeah, absolutely. Just this intense energy that I had to respect, you know? And if I respected her energy, then she could work with me. So 8s can be very intense, and they trust their inner authority, but so much so that they tend to be out of touch with both their heart and their head.
Yeah.
Right? They don't stop to consider before they act, at least when they're less healthy.
Yeah, 8s are fire, ready, aim.
And they tend to be less in touch with their heart. 8s will leave a trail of destruction behind them and not realize it. Once they realize, like, their bulldozing ways are actually causing harm to people, then that's actually a problem for them. They don't like that. They're trying to...
Yeah.
8s have an angry sense of justice. They're actually trying to accomplish something in the world. It's just that they are the most likely to run over real people in the name of justice on behalf of people.
I agree.
Yeah. That moves us into 9 space.
Moves us into 9.
Couldn't be more different, 8s and 9s.
Oh my gosh. I don't know how they exist as neighbors. Actually, that would be kind of a funny...
The Odd Couple?
Yeah, like the Odd Couple. Like
an 8 and a 9 in a house?
Imagine these two people as neighbors. Yeah. So anyway, 9s, the phrase that I use to understand 9s is just let's just turn it down a little bit. Let's just turn the volume down. See, we haven't really talked about what the gut center is.
Yeah.
So from what I hear, I'm not a gut person, but from what I hear, reality just comes at the gut people in waves. Like, they just don't have any filters on it. As head people, we're able to kind of filter this stuff through our head. Heart people, they filter everything that comes at them through their heart. But the gut people, it just hits them like a full-body blow, and reality is just coming at them. 8s, they believe that they can wrestle that tsunami back into the ocean. That's their tactic. 9s, they just want...
at its mercy.
Yeah, they're at its mercy. It's almost like they don't have a defense for it. And so what they try and do is just try and turn the volume down on everything. Let's just calm everything down. They're always trying to, like, avoid conflict, because conflict turns the volume up. They're always trying to just make everything more peaceful.
If they belong to a group and there's conflict between members of the group, let's say that a group is loosely on two sides of an issue, because that's often how it ends up happening. The 9 doesn't want to choose sides in that conflict, would rather move beyond the conflict if possible, doesn't understand why it has to be so conflictual. And members of both sides will trust the 9 and talk with them and believe the 9 is on their side, whereas the 9 doesn't want to be on either side.
Yeah. In fact, what they say about 9s is that they understand everybody's perspective but their own. So this is what gets lost in their attempts to quiet everything down and avoid conflict, is that they actually lose touch with their own point of view.
Whereas the 8 is obsessive about their own internal authority, the 9 tends to not even recognize their own internal authority.
9s will lose touch with their own desires, their own agendas, all in a sacrifice to try and avoid conflict and just turn the volume down on reality. That's what they're hoping is. I feel like 9s just have this almost like when TVs used to have static. I just realized the other day they don't anymore.
Yeah.
When you turn to a channel that isn't there and it just make that sound. I feel like there's just that going on in the background of both 9s and 1s in a different way. And they just can we just turn that down a little bit? Can we just get the volume down? Let's just settle it down more. That's what they're trying to do.
Now, the thing about the gut center is all 3 types in the gut center are driven by anger. Just like the 3 types in the head center are all driven by fear, right?
Yep.
And so the 9 does not look angry. In fact, they're often unaware of the underlying anger that's present all the time. It's like it's just a background noise, that they're angry about the conflict and the drama and the noise. But rather than get in touch with that and act on it, The dysfunction is to avoid it. Much like the 7 avoids the hard feelings, the 9 is avoiding the anger and the drama, and trying to generate peace, which makes them great peacemakers. But counterintuitively, they're better peacemakers when they're in touch with their own inner conflict rather than avoiding it. Because otherwise they tend to be peacekeepers and not actually create peace, but just try to stifle the conflict, right?
Yeah.
This is Seth's image, but I love it so much, I'm going to selfishly tell the story. I think the best image for a 9 that people will access pretty easily is Bruce Banner. Bruce Banner is absolutely a 9. He's the most peaceful and, in a sense, conflict-avoiding member ever.
Especially as played by Mark Ruffalo. Yeah. I suspect that Mark Ruffalo is actually a 9.
Yeah. His superpower is getting in touch with the anger that's always there.
Yeah.
The secret is he's always
right.
there.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But he has to access it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it's powerful.
But it's also a struggle. Like, he's always holding it down, which 9s typically do. They're always holding that down because they don't even want to be in touch with that anger, because anger is volume. I mean, just look at the 8 who's in touch with their anger. 8s they're voluminous. I don't know if that's is that
voluminous,
voluminous,
whatever it is. I mean, 8s have the volume turned up. That's why I don't know how 8s and 9s, even on the Enneagram, exist as neighbors. My goodness, I mean,
except part of the beautiful thing about the Enneagram is that, again, we won't really get into wings here. If you want to get into wings, we'll talk about that more on our podcast for sure. Or there are other resources.
Well, we haven't revealed this to the listener yet, but eventually we are gonna type Blake, and so who knows what we'll get into as we type.
Yeah, maybe we may have to talk about wings there.
Blake, you don't know this, but you have wings.
Yes, that's what I've always wanted.
You wanted wings.
When you are locked up in one of these types, you're primarily in that energy, but pretty early on in life, like late teens, about the time that you start to settle into one type of energy, you also start to move out into a secondary, which is on either side, right? So 8s frequently have a 9 wing, and 9s frequently have an 8 wing, and that's one of the strange and counterintuitive things that make people interesting.
Yeah. They're not just a caricature of one type. They actually there's lots of variety within the Enneagram. There's all kinds of dynamics at play in each type, and
I think the 9.
I don't know that we'll be able to get into it here.
I think the 9-8 combination is just one of those very interesting pairings because they contrast so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
And 5 and 4 is like that. Yeah. I'm a 5 with a 4 wing. That is weird. It was weird to me, whatever.
Vibes, all I being youths. One is the loneliest number that you'll ever do. 2 can be as bad as 1. It's the loneliest number since the number 1.
We're almost done with the gut center. We should talk about 1s.
Yeah. So, 1s are that person who just really wishes things would just stay in order. 1s are perfectionists in a way. They typically have 2 or 3 areas of life where when they look out into the world, they see how great and perfect things could be, and up against that backdrop, they see how things aren't that way. And so that's when their version of reality just has these red flags that pop up and says, I'm not the way I should be. And it just drives them nuts.
It's sort of that sense of platonic ideals that's in the ether.
Except that they walk into a room, and what I would consider a room to be clean, they will see that there are 5 paper clips sitting out on the table beside the couch, and God damn it, why are those paper clips there?
Except here's the thing. It's rarely rage at the person. It can come across that way. It's almost more like the classic image I like to use is the dishwasher, just because it's a great center for domestic conflict, right? Because we have our different philosophies about how to load and unload a dishwasher, right?
Yep.
Except the one,
I'm a 5 with a 6 wing. I've perfected that thing.
the one
I have a
thinks
system.
the one not only thinks they've got it right, they're irritated with you because if you would only do it their way, you would see why it's better. If you would just unload the bottom rack first and then the top rack, you would save yourself so much trouble, and you can see how it's concern for you being expressed as anger at you.
Yeah. And so this is the, like I said, the static that the 9 feels. This is the way that the 1 feels, that ongoing constant static in the back of their mind. Just this so many things that just aren't living up to the way that they should be. Should is a big word for once.
They should all over the place.
Yeah, they should. Except that they also feel that they can't express that outwardly because they have this same kind of sense of themselves where they should be this good little boy or girl, this perfect. They have a sense of who they should be. And typically expressing their anger doesn't fit into that. So they just hold it down. They hold it back until at some point it bursts forth, and they tend to just go haywire on you.
The voice of their inner critic is what their major dysfunction really is. Because it gets wielded at them and the world around them. But it's the obsessive inner critic.
Yeah, all of us have an inner critic, this little voice, this little super ego in there that tells us, oh boy, you shouldn't have done that. Oh, that wasn't right. But for the 1, the inner critic never lets up. It's just a constant, ongoing assault of judgment inside their own mind. That it's, I know ones who. I've seen them when they're so exhausted from their inner critic that it starts to leak out, where like they can't even hold it in. They start to just almost speak in the voice of their own inner critic, talking to themselves. Oh my gosh, it's exhausting. And so that's the burden of the 1 going through life with this constant sense of judgment and never living up to what you should be. So 1s tend to lose any sense of any gray area. Everything, including themselves, is either as it should be or it's not good enough. And so they don't even allow for any kind of sense of their own growth, their own progression. They're either good enough or they aren't.
Right.
And that's why the path toward health for a 1 is accepting that life is a process and that people are trying, even if it doesn't look like it, you know. Reckoning with the fact that people have pasts that haven't let go of them yet. Recognizing like the idea that every person could potentially be doing their best, no matter how unrealistic that may seem on the surface. The idea that everyone may genuinely be doing the best they can is a huge stumbling block for 1s, and is also their liberation. And that's including them. Like, you have to accept the fact that you may be doing your best, and that your standards are just oppressive.
Yeah, just impossibly high.
Yeah. In fact, you could I feel like we keep adding in like new little nuggets. And so everyone's going to know like the very least about the 5 because that's where we started. But you could identify for each type something about themselves that they over-identify with. And so 1s over-identify with their own impossibly high standards. That's where they get their sense of who they are, their sense of meaning, is by latching onto these impossibly high standards, and ultimately it's kind of their downfall. And that's how, like I said, you could point out one of those for each type.
Yeah.
If you want to learn more, I'm sure that we'll cover that at some point on our podcast.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks. We're just going to make that our refrain.
No, that's a great refrain. Just keep plugging.
Yeah, okay. So, Heart Center, we begin with the twos. Oh, twos. They're so sweet.
The terrible twos.
So nice. They're wonderful. They're giving. They are kind. They're charitable. No one is hospitable like a two is hospitable.
They will pick up on your needs sometimes that
do.
you don't even recognize you have them.
Yeah.
They're so intuitive about that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the dysfunction of it is that is twofold. Okay, that's oh man, we gotta cut that out.
I'm really sorry.
Now that you pointed it out, there's no way I'm cutting it out.
I guess beer needs to be fat.
Okay, so the dysfunction of a two is twofold in this way. So yes, they are exceptionally gifted at picking up on the needs of others and meeting them before they even are manifest in that person, to varying degrees. However, that ability tends to be a way of avoiding their own needs. Twos are very out of touch with their own real needs and desires. Sometimes they're totally out of touch with them. They don't even recognize they have them. Sometimes they just don't feel like they have the authority to take those seriously. They have this judgment thing going on. Twos very much need other people to see them as good. And so they are good at meeting those other people's needs and caring for them so that everyone thinks this person is really good. And that's the lure. That's how twos draw people in. So the reciprocal relationship that they're trying to set up is, I take care of you so that everyone else will take care of me, because they almost need that, because they're not going to do a great job taking care of themselves necessarily.
And yet at the same time, oftentimes they won't ever accept your care. Like if you say, oh, like, let me make a cup of coffee, they'll say, no, I'll make it.
Yeah.
Like they're going to hop in and always be the one taking care of needs. There's this kind of like real just tragic switch that they play where like they want you to take care of them. They won't ever let it happen.
And so let's say a two wants a cup of coffee. They need to be able to make coffee for you so that they can have some.
Yeah.
I had a roommate once who was a two, very strong two, one of the sweetest guys ever. Yeah. Now I'm a five, right? So I'm highly introverted, really need castle time, and at the time I was a particularly unhealthy five, so this was all rabid. So when I would get home from work, I want to hide, right? I want to be left alone. Except when I would walk through the door and he would be there, he'd say, hey, how was your day? How are you doing? And I wouldn't know how to respond very well because I didn't have things to say. But also I didn't want to be asked. I wanted to be left alone.
Right.
And so I would kind of brush him off, or I'd try to give him something. One day it just clicked in my mind. It's like I saw it in his eyes. It's not that he didn't care about my day or how I was doing. He wanted to tell me about his day. He had something he needed to share, but the only way he could have permission to do that was to ask me about my day. Because I'm supposed to do the reciprocal thing, and then I say something like, my day was okay, how was yours? And that gives him permission to do the thing he needs to do. And I never did that for him, right? And so that's twofold. One, I need to know how to care for twos better by offering the reciprocal deal, but also twos need to rely on that less and just be honest about what they need. Just tell me you need to talk about your day. Then I'm good. I'll listen, right? There's a second way in which this dynamic is dysfunctional, and it usually shows up more in the most unhealthy twos. Twos are the most compassionate and loving and gentle people unless you spurn their care. They offer to you and offer to you and offer to you, and if they feel like you're just taking advantage of them, that resentment builds, and it can explode back at you with a vengeance. It can be extraordinarily ugly when that happens, because it turns everything on its head. They know how to meet your needs, and also apparently they know how to bring you down too. And so just imagine like a very needy, I mean, this is stereotypical and it's a problem. We tend to associate 2 energy with women, especially in conservative circles and especially in Christian circles. We tend to associate 2 with femininity. So we have this idea of what moms can be like, right?
Yeah, or just what it makes me think of is like the stereotypical Martha, like.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
So run with that. Exactly. Run with a stereotype, recognizing that it is a stereotype, and imagine what happens when I'm doing everything for you and you're taking advantage of me. You do nothing but. Imagine the lash that comes back at you when that happens, right? So that's the other dysfunctional element with 2s, is there's frequently the unexpected exact opposite of their whole nature.
Let me throw this out for your audience in particular. One thing that I've noticed is within evangelical communities, the community tries to force women into being 2s. And I've known a lot of women who still, even like after they've broken from the community, misidentify as 2s because of there being such a strong push, such strong pressure to be that.
Right.
So evangelicals want their women to be They want their women to be 2s.
Right.
Well,
because like within complementarian things like that, I mean, there's a sense that there's this help. You're supposed to be the helper. You're supposed to be.
Well, and I grew up in a church that didn't even believe in complementarianism, but still was just more comfortable with, we have a place for you in the nursery if you'd ever like to help out.
Right. Yeah.
Or even if it's not complementarianism, there's still an assumption like, well, women are the more compassionate of the genders, right?
Yeah.
Or just all of those assumptions about how this has to work.
You're so naturally caring.
So even if women don't necessarily misidentify as 2, sometimes there's residual guilt because they're conscious of not being 2 enough, right? Imagine a woman who grows up as an evangelical and is an 8, right? Imagine the conflict that goes on where they're instinctively leadership material. They want to accomplish things. They're more likely to run someone over than help them up, not because they don't want to help people, because they do want to help people, right? And then you force them into a 2 role. What happens to people when you do that,
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think that's definitely worth noting here.
Yeah, definitely. That's a very good point.
Thanks. I've got a few.
So the things we can hold on to from the 2 as we move into the others is this external locus of identity, right? I need you to let me know that I'm good because I have trouble identifying as good myself. That'll be something that we keep a hold of as we move through the heart center.
Yeah, because that's all of the heart center deals with issues of image and deceit around that image. So the 2 there is kind of like a deceitful little game they're playing. They're trying to lure you in so that I'm going to help you and care for you, and then you're going to come around and appreciate me and love me and give me the things that I want, but we're never going to talk about it. They feel like they need to lure you into it.
Yeah, there's a sense of performance.
Like trick you into it.
It is performance.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so that's what these are things that we see in all 3 of the heart types is this building up of an image in order to gain the love that they want, that they can't feel they can access except through deceit, through some kind of game, through some kind of trick. 3s do that in a way different than 2s. 3s are
they're chameleons. chameleons.
They are chameleons.
Because it's frequent for some of the rest of us to look at 3 types and say, okay, you're all these different things in these different situations, but who are you really? And a 3 says, what do you mean, who am I really? I am a chameleon.
Yeah. When a 3 walks into the room, and I've actually asked this of 3s when they're trying to figure out what they are. When they walk into a room, they understand who they need to be for that room in order to look successful. And they instantly put on that mask. It's not even like thinking about what do I need to be. They just recognize it. They put on that mask. They are that person. They just adapt in that way. Mm-hmm. And they found this image of success, this image of prestige. And they just do that like everywhere they go. I know someone who works with a 3, knows him very well, and has said that there's times when they're in meetings together and he goes, I just don't even recognize that guy. Because he just it's a different person, a different mask that he needs to put on in order to seem successful, and it's different than any other mask that my friend has seen him put on before, and he's just like, who is this guy? They just switch that easily.
Now, most of us do belong to more than one community, right? Like, so we belong to a home community, a work community, a faith community, maybe a residential community. Like, we belong to multiple communities. Yeah. And those communities are partially constitutive of who we are, right? And so when I'm in a different place, I act appropriate to that place. Yeah. Except I do my best to fuddle through that. And a 3 instinctively excels in each one of those places with seemingly no concern for how they might be in conflict with each other. Mm-hmm. So it's easy for the rest of us to call that hypocrisy, except not necessarily. Now, it is the 3's task to begin to discern what's the consistent thread in all that, and how can I integrate the different parts of myself so that I'm consistently who I am, even as I'm chameleoning myself in these communities.
Yeah, who am I underneath all these masks that I put on?
But it doesn't change the fact that they're exceptionally good at adapting and making themselves successful.
Yeah, and 3s become very good at identifying goals, seeing what obstacles are in the way of achieving those goals, finding the most efficient way, 3s love efficiency, finding the most efficient way to maneuver around those obstacles and look good the whole time doing it.
Yeah.
They do. They really do. 3s just always they are very good at actually attaining success and looking good doing it.
It may not be any surprise, therefore, to find out that very many politicians are 3s. Mm-hmm. They excel at exactly those skills that it requires to be successful in politics, the way our system is set up.
And that kind of like polished image crafting skill that 3s have.
Which is frequently why the rest of us common people are suspicious of politicians, and we have this perception that they're often untrustworthy or hypocritical or whatever, that there's something they're hiding, which may be true, and it may also be that they're 3s, and they haven't figured out how to integrate themselves.
Yeah, and 3s often too kind of have something to hide, because 3s oftentimes don't let people get very close, not because they're afraid that you'll see what's underneath, but because they're afraid that there might not be anything underneath at all if they haven't found it themselves yet. They have these masks, and they lose touch with their actual own sense of like a consistent self. So that's the bargain that the 3 makes, and the burden that they bear is, I'm really not sure who I am at all. I'm just really good at this game. And so 3s will oftentimes be the last ones to come to any kind of self-work or anything like the Enneagram, because their game seems to work. They actually get what they want out of it. They want success. They're typically really good at getting it. And that will sustain them, where for most people, by the time you're in your mid-30s, you've kind of hit the limits of your own personality, and you find that you kind of feel like you're in a trap and you're not really getting what you want out of it, and you kind of run into your own dysfunction. 3s can go on a lot longer before they realize that that's a thing, because they want success, they're getting success, this seems to be working.
3s and 8s. That's one of the things that 3s and 8s have in common. 8s are frequently one of the last to discover their dysfunction as well, because bulldozers are very good at bulldozing, right? The very idea that a bulldozer would stop and become self-reflective, right, is an absurd idea. That's almost a cartoon, except that is what it takes for an 8, and it usually takes some sort of life-stopping event to make that happen.
Yeah.
And so sometimes with 3s as well. So take, for example, this image that comes around every now and then of a politician who is very successful, gets caught in some kind of expose, right? And their career is ruined, but in the process actually finds some kind of redemption and recenters and like recognizes they have a center, and then becomes a healthier, more effective person, right? That's the 3.
Yeah, that's the 3.
We're almost done.
Wow,
last one.
So, brief caveat here. I try to be careful when I talk about 4s, because I want to recognize I personally have issues with 4 energy, right? It's not my place to type other people. I try to help people find their types, but I can't decide what someone is. But if I were to guess, I would say that my mother was a 4, and I have a lot of conflict there, a lot of baggage there, and I have a 4 wing, and the 4 wing is where historically I've carried most of my shame and baggage. So I will try my best to
be generous to 4s.
Be generous to 4s and talk about 4 energy without just injecting all of my animosity in there. But you may notice I'm very, very good at picking up on the dysfunctional notes of 4 energy.
Which is easy to do because they are obviously the worst of all types.
At the very least,
with that in mind.
At the very least, they are the most likely to fetishize their own dysfunction.
Yeah. So 4s are the hardiest of the heart types, which in some ways is wonderful, but they also get stuck there very easily. And 4s don't find happiness in sadness, but they do find a kind of satisfaction in it. In fact, it's almost like that's where they find their sense of meaning.
It helps them know that they're real.
Yeah.
I know I'm real when I'm suffering. They have an obsession with authenticity, right?
Yes.
Well, one of the clearest markers that I'm being my authentic self is that I'm in touch with my suffering, right? So you can create this rabbit hole of the deeper I go into my own darkness, the more real and authentic I am, even though that's absolutely a fabrication. That's an artificial construction, but they're seeking authenticity.
Yeah. And so this is the trick. They like the 2 and the 3, they're seeking an image. They're trying to craft an image, but their image is I'm special and I'm authentic and I'm just the most pretty little flower in the whole flower patch.
And I'm misunderstood.
And so they tend to be outliers.
Yeah.
4s and 5s actually both. There's a lot of weird similarities between 4s and 5s.
4s and 5s are usually the first to be drawn to the Enneagram and recognize their dysfunction, because 4s and 5s alike carry this sense from very early in life that we're not entirely right.
Yeah.
There's something broken in
4s
us.
and 5s both already have a sense, and have probably always had a sense, or at least for a very long time had a sense, that we are broken. We just feel like broken little toys. And so where most people, when they're typed, get this, like, it hurts. It's like, oh, those are all the things I don't want to know about myself. 4s and 5s feel that, but then they also feel a little bit of satisfaction and going, oh, There's a
what it's
name
been.
for that. There's other people like me that are broken like this.
Mm-hmm.
Even before I knew the Enneagram, I used to talk about myself, and I shared this analogy with Steve too, where I said I just feel like I'm Pinocchio hoping to become a real boy someday.
Mm-hmm. Long before I ran into the Enneagram, I would say things like, whatever it is that other people have, I don't have it.
And yeah, 4s very much feel that way. 4s tend to look around, and even though they're crafting this image of how special they are, they tend to be really, really talented in the arts. Not always, but this is where there's an overwhelming number of 4s in the arts compared to other types.
They're very good at delving the depths of emotion and finding ways to express it. That's their gift.
And so even though they tend to be immensely talented in those areas, they will look around and say, oh, everyone else is just so more talented than I. Everyone else just has something that I don't have. They will just obsessively compare themselves with others and always come up short.
And so, I mean, obviously there are different ways of being a 4, right? Like, we could talk about the 3 subtypes of being a 4, or you could be 4 with a 3 wing or 4 with a 5 wing. But even beyond all that, there's an infinite number of ways to be a 4. So occasionally you do get this 4 type that is ultra confident. They know their work is the best. And so the cliche of that is the overconfident artist, right? Like, they know they're the best and they kind of scorn what everyone else does. But then there's also the self-defeating artist, right? Which is another cliche, but it's an exaggerated version of an energy that 4s frequently fall into, where they're creative and they might even think their stuff is good for a while, except they're going to measure it up with everyone else, and they know everything wrong with what they've done, and they see nothing wrong with what everyone else has done, and it can be this paralyzing, self-inflictual dynamic.
And so the game that the 4s are playing is that they feel like they have to craft this really, truly special and different and authentic person in order to deserve love. 2s have to be caring in order to deserve love. 3s have to be successful in order to deserve love. 4s have to be special. But the trick there is, if you are crafting an image, how authentic is it really? It's this trick of trying to craft an authentic image. It doesn't work. And so they're always crafting this, and at the same time trying to hide from themselves the fact that they're crafting it.
So all of the types construct their authenticity in various ways, right? Like, that's just a thing that humans do, and we don't like to admit that we construct authenticity, but 4s are the ones who take that dynamic to the extreme. They're like the exaggerated version of constructed authenticity. So imagine someone who wears a lot of blacks and purples, has a very unique style of dress,
which strangely,
very dramatic.
Strangely, that is a thing for 4s. They tend to wear lots of black and purple. I don't know of any other type where there's a specific color and dress associated with them. This is a weird thing for 4s. I like it, but
I think it's because we associate, like, culturally, we associate those things with mood, right? We associate those things with passion and depth, right? So I had, when I was a professor at that university that we both went to, Blake, I had a synesthete in class, and she would associate colors with names. And so we were asking her, like, oh, what color is my name? And one of our very good friends was in that class, and he is a 4, and she was like, oh, that name, that's purple. That's real purple. And he was so pleased that his name was purple. It's just so it really is down to his very aura. Think
is
Prince.
Purple. Think Prince.
Prince is so 4.
Exactly. And our friend loves Prince.
He does.
Wow, this is all coming together. There's an order to the cosmos, Blake. That's what I need to tell you. There's an order to the cosmos.
Thank goodness for that.
I think that completes the tour around the horseshoe, doesn't it?
I think so. Have we said enough about the 4? Is there anything we're missing? I love 4s.
Yeah.
I love them. If you need someone who, like, when you have gone through something really terrible and you're feeling these emotions and you're not even sure how to sort them out, what a 4 will do is a 4 will just sit down in the mud with you because they're not afraid of the strong emotions.
Yes.
They're not scared off by them. They know how to handle them, and they can handle them with you, and they can help you sort out even like your emotions. When you don't know how to handle this strong feeling, they do.
Yeah.
And they'll do it with you. And that's the beauty of 4s. I love them.
If you need someone to sort out your mind and help,
5s.
you go to a 5. If you need someone to sort out your heart, you go to a 4, because they're the ones who do that obsessively. They're exceptionally good at it.
Yep.
So they need to find balance
Except-
themselves, but it becomes a gift to others.
So I'm a 5 and Steve is a 5. When my mind is going all crazy, I can't sort out my own thoughts. But if Steve comes along, he can help me sort out my thoughts, and I do the same for him.
Yes.
5s are really good. We know the headspace so well that if you don't know how to sort out your thoughts, we can come along and help you rearrange them and sort them out. 4s do that with the heart. But in the same way as I can't sort out my own head, I need Steve to come along. 4s don't necessarily know how to sort out their own hearts either. We can do it for anybody, but not ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, that is the Enneagram. We're done.
Yeah. Now everyone knows everything they need to know about the
That's
Enneagram.
We've now addressed the most superficial level of the whole thing.
Yeah. Honestly, one of our episodes that we've recorded for our own podcast, we do the same thing. We do it a little bit more in depth, but even still, it's a little superficial. I'm hoping that this introduction is enough to get people interested and to explore.
Right. No, and I haven't addressed it directly within the podcast or anything. And that's the thing about, coming to this, even as someone that's sort of approached it from different sides over the last year or two, as I've been exposed to it through Stephen and you, Seth, and through other people that I know online, like just trying to like understand the jargon that you sort of run into, because people throw it around online now. And like, honestly, one of my resolutions for 2018 was like, like understand this jargon, even at the base level, because.
Yeah. Should we tell your listeners that that's actually how this came about? Was one day you tweeted out, I guess I'm going to have to learn the Enneagram just so I can continue to have conversations on this thing. Yes. And we said, hey, man, we'd be happy to help.
Yeah.
And that was actually before we even had decided to do our own podcast. But,
right. Yeah, exactly.
That's kind of where our lives were going anyway. And
right.
So it all just kind of came together in this really, again, if I can use the word, providential way.
Yeah, absolutely. So
that we love, and we want to share that love with you.
Right. Yeah, and I appreciate it. Like, and that's the thing. That's what I know. Even like, again, sort of bringing back how much I've sort of circled this topic personally is, I know Steve on Facebook somewhere was like, the best way to do this is through conversation. Books are okay. Yeah. Books are fine. You can learn a lot through books, but one of the key things about this is that it really helps to have conversations with people that have done it before, and et cetera. So I'm thankful for both of you taking the time to dive into it.
It's our pleasure.
And that is where part 1 of this conversation ends. Check in later this week for part 2, where Seth and Stephen type me on air. It's going to be all sorts of fun. Talk to you soon.